In this episode, I speak with Kyrah. She tells me of her journey into birthing her first child without having a medical professional present. While working in a birth center while pregnant, Kyrah was seeing all of the first-time mothers being transferred to hospital, and that started to get her wheels turning for finding a different way to birth. Kyrah decided to birth at home and tried to hire a traditional midwife, but with no response, ended up hiring a medical midwife to attend to her. Kyrah and the medical midwife didn't really vibe, but the tension that Kyrah felt acted as a way for her to trust herself and stand more in her power to birth her baby the way she wanted. Listen to this journey of Kyrah believing that she could, in fact, have a pleasurable birth experience even after hearing her medical midwife say that that's not possible for any woman, and also not believing Kyrah when she expressed where she was during her birth process. This is a fast and furious birth story that isn't to be missed. Hello, Kyrah. Welcome to the Free Birthing in Color movement. I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Hi, Karma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful. Yes. So let's just get right into it because I'm really excited to hear your story and just have this space for you to freely speak. So what is your ancestry and your lineage that you're passing on to your children?
My ancestry, my mother is Moroccan and my dad is Jamaican. And I was raised by a single father. So I was primarily around, I was really raised more on the American side, but my grandma was my kind of root back to my Jamaican culture. And now as an adult and as a mother, I get to experience my mother's culture through my own mother. So that's been a journey back home as well.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. Jamaican and Moroccan. Have you been back to
I've
either?
been to Jamaica several times, yeah, but now I definitely want to go to Morocco. Hopefully, when I have a daughter myself, it just seems so special to go, with her, myself, and my mom and my sister back to Morocco. That's something we're really looking forward to.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I really hope that that comes into being for you then. But speaking of your children, where does your motherhood journey begin?
That is such a beautiful question. My motherhood journey for me begins when I heard an old, I guess it's an African adage or something like that, but it's a story about how a mother becomes a mother the moment she decides she wants a child.
Mhm.
And so the story goes that she'll go and she'll sit beneath a tree and she'll kind of call in the spirit of her baby, and she will come up with a song for that baby. And so she'll begin to sing that song, and all the way through conception, through birth, and that child's whole life, they'll be sung that same song from everyone in their village. Everyone knows that that's their song. And when I heard that, it just rang so true for me. And so I sat down. My husband and I were on completely different sides of the spectrum as far as when we wanted to start a family.
Mhm.
And I took it to God, and I was like, listen, Lord, you're the only person who can make this decision. I'm not going to I don't want to have resentment towards my husband, so I'm just going to, release that desire, but just know, like, I want a baby so badly.
Mhm.
And within a week, I guess my husband came to my side and we got pregnant.
Wow.
And yeah, and I had just a wonderful pregnancy experience. But to go back a little bit, I actually my avenue to birth and motherhood was a little bit more intricate than that, because although that's very kind of like spiritual and I'm gonna go talk to God about it and it'll be fine, it didn't
Mhm.
start like that. I remember, because I was raised by a single father, I
Mhm.
wasn't conscious of my femininity, I guess, and what it means to be a woman. And so it wasn't until I was actually birth work found me. And so my motherhood journey maybe even begins back when I became a doula.
Mm.
And that was a story of synchronicity as well, because I was working in the hospital in labor and delivery as the insurance girl. And I was super excited to go up to labor and delivery, because all I had ever seen was the moms coming off the elevator with their baby, and they look so just beautiful. And it seemed like it must be such a beautiful place up there. And
Mhm.
when I went up that day to train, I stepped off the elevator, and it was just a line of women, some of them clearly in labor, and they're just waiting to get checked in, and it's a long line, and I go up and I start getting trained by the young lady, and the reason the line is held up is because she's trying to get the woman who's at the front of the line to pay.
Oh,
And
okay.
yes, and so she starts training me on how this goes, and I'm just baffled because it was completely all about money. It was women kept asking me questions about what they could and could not do once they went back through those doors because they were scared to ask the nurses. And I had never been put in a position before to even think about these questions, but the only thing I kept saying was, you can do whatever you need to do, whatever feels right to you. And I was, that was the only thing I was sure of. I had no idea anything about birth. I had always said, you could just knock me out and just take the baby out and wake me up when it's over. That was where I was coming from.
Okay.
And so it was at that front desk as I thought to myself, like, gosh, there's got to be a better way than this. This seems so impersonal. And I had never
Mm-hmm.
thought about it before. And the word doula popped into my head out of nowhere. I had never heard that word. And so I looked it up at the front desk, and I just fell headfirst into this world that I was like, oh my gosh, this is where I belong. Like,
Mm.
I've been looking for somewhere that I feel at home, and this is it. Look at these women coming together to do, like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Okay.
But the problem was that I was halfway through a master's program in hospital administration.
Okay.
And my dad he was, very adamant that I would follow that professional path, and I would become, the CEO of a hospital, and I would probably be the first one to get a PhD in our family. And that was the path.
Okay.
And so I had to make a decision in that moment of like, what do I do? Because there's no way he's going to be like, sure, go become a doula. He's never even
Yeah.
heard of that word before. So I went to my mom, who I had just started like rekindling a relationship with. At 18, we were, there was no longer any kind of custody things happening. So we were able to start
Mm.
getting to know each other again. And I went to her and I asked her what she thought. And she said, well, sometimes your destiny is on the other side of the unknown. So why don't you go for it? So she gave me the money to go and become certified as a doula.
Mm.
And I fell in love with it. And I went down the path of wanting to become a midwife as well.
Okay.
But I was like, I can't do both. Midwifery school is so intense. I can't stay where I'm at and do that. I have to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
And so I called my dad. Well, first I got into midwifery school because I wanted to show my dad I had a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dropped out of my master's program. The midwifery school I wanted to get into wasn't accepting applications anymore, but I called them up and I sent letters and this is my dream. I want, and of course, because birth workers, big hearts, and we need more birth workers. She was like, yes, girl, come on down. We start next week. So I got all of my my financial aid situation transferred over so I would be able to take care of paying for school. And the last mountain I had to tackle was my dad. So I called him up and I was like, this is what's happening. And for once in my life, I was completely honest with him. And I told him, I do not like what I'm doing. I feel miserable. And this is what I want to do. I feel like this is what I'm meant to do.
Mm.
And it did not go well.
Okay.
He stopped talking to me, and I had to figure out, basically at that point, I had to just learn how to survive on my own. I had to go and work full time so that I could now pay for my own rent and just start making my own way in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a long kind of journey back throughout all of that, that time back home to myself. And it was through that journey of figuring out, like, who am I actually, that I discovered, like, oh, I actually don't want to birth in the system. I
Mm-hmm.
actually don't want any of that they're selling. I don't want, I don't know what I want, but I know it's not that.
Yeah.
And so I started working at a birth center, and I thought, maybe this is what I want. Maybe I can give birth here with these midwives who love me, and it would, it would be it would make the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
But once I became pregnant, even that didn't feel right, because I just noticed a pattern of all of these first time moms being transferred to the hospital quite frequently in my at the birth center that I was working at. And
Yeah.
it scared me. And I was like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go, but if not here, then where? So I just prayed about it. And I was like, Lord, just show me who needs to be my care provider and just make it really, really clear, because I have no idea what I'm doing. And I reached out to a traditional midwife, and she actually never responded to me. And so I ended up going with a I would call her a midwife. She was very she's very much just kind of, she still kind of operates like the system is still in her,
Yeah.
even though she's been removed from the system. And so I did end up going with her because, you know, she took my insurance and she felt like my only option for a home birth. And so
Okay.
I went with her, but as I'm getting to know her, I'm just like, we're not vibing. I
Mm.
mentioned that I wanted my husband to catch the baby, and she was like, well, I'm not really a hands-off kind of midwife.
Oh
And
God, she said
yes,
that?
and I was like,
Oh, yikes. Ugh.
and just there were several things throughout, and I to be fair, I do still think she was the midwife for me, because she was the one who was like, you know, you appear very calm, but your, you know, your heart rate is always elevated, and your blood pressure is, you know, not high but just a little bit elevated. Like, are you as calm as you are, as you appear to be? And it caused me to look inside and be like, am I not calm? Like, am I an anxious person? Which I realized, oh, there is something under the surface brewing that I wasn't aware of. So I actually really appreciated having her as a midwife, because she said a couple of key things to me that ignited my kind of desire to go more internal and figure
Hmm.
out who I was
Hmm.
becoming through this journey.
Yeah.
And she also said, she told me to embrace my inner hippie. She was like, if you need to get you some crystals and just like carry them around and rub them and tell yourself, like, I am, she said, and she gave me a mantra to tell myself. And it was, I am true to myself. And she
Okay.
had no idea how accurate that mantra was that she gave me. That was exactly what I needed to be telling myself and to grow into, is I am true to myself. Like, in all of the decisions that I make, I am true to myself.
Hmm.
And so you know, we go through the pregnancy, and there's really no issues between her and I, but I just knew I don't want her there. What am I going to do when it comes time? Because I don't want her there. And at the time, I was still a hardcore rule follower. Like I said, I was raised by a single military father who was just, you know, my way or the highway. So I
Yeah.
only knew how to follow the rules. So when
Right.
even birthing outside the system in a home birth, I'm still like, am I allowed to just not call her when it happens? And like,
Mm.
I'm at 43 weeks and 3 days. She scheduled me for an ultrasound and a biophysical profile. And I didn't want to go because I was like, if they start looking around in there, they're going to be like, oh, your fluid levels. And now we need to monitor you, and the whole cascade of interventions. And I
So
didn't want to go.
can I interrupt you quickly? So where in this journey with working with this medical midwife did you start to come to the idea, like obviously you said you two weren't vibing. So then where did you like where did the idea of free birth come into your mind? Because I know I've spoken with women that are like, "Oh, I wasn't vibing with my medical midwife, but I still called her and like I'd never heard of free birth, so that never crossed my path." So where did that come in for you where you're kind of like, "Oh, it's could be
So
different."
it really was, it kind of subconsciously came to me because in the last couple of weeks of my pregnancy, I started scripting what I wanted my ideal birth to look like.
Mhm.
And so I scripted something. I basically was writing as if I was creating my Instagram post to announce my birth and the birth of my baby. And I wrote,
Mm.
everything happened so quickly that I didn't call the midwife. I just had the baby by myself and everything was great. And so it kind of was in my mind. I had a hope that I would just go to the bathroom and just accidentally have the baby so that I wouldn't have to deal with the confrontation of deciding not to call the midwife. But
Okay.
but I also never consciously decided I'm going to free birth, because that
Okay.
just was so not me. I'm
Mm.
like, I'm not going to break the rules like that. And so I
Mm.
just was like, I'm just going to see what happens and just like cover my eyes and just hope that the baby pops out and then I don't have to decide. So it
Okay.
wasn't actually until I was in labor and those events began to unfold that I was like, nah, she's just not going to be here. And now this is the course that we're following.
Okay. I see. I see.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
So you were
where was,
saying you were at 43 weeks and she wanted you to come in for some testing and stuff.
yes, yes. And my husband's like, you just don't go, just miss the appointment. They're not going to show up at the door with the police. And I was like, oh, but they're going to be mad at me.
Okay.
And
And wait,
so
because you went to 43 weeks, like once
I'm
you
sorry.
passed.
I'm so sorry. 41 weeks and three
Oh,
days.
okay. Okay. Because I was going to say, how was she so calm with you going that far? Usually, after like 40 weeks and a couple of days, they're like hounding you. You need to get your baby out.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So
No, no, no. She
41.
actually let me go past 41 weeks because she had a lot of other moms around the same time as me who were going to give birth. So she wasn't like really bothering me at all. I
Okay.
just didn't want to go in for that ultrasound and start that whole
Yeah.
rigmarole.
Yeah.
And so she had said, like, go ahead and take some castor oil. But I had taken a tablespoon of castor oil for 2 days in a row, which was her recommendation, just like take it straight. And I'd always heard like castor oil smoothie, but she recommended just take a tablespoon, and nothing happened for me. So the night before we were supposed to go to get the ultrasound, I just did one last ditch effort, and I just like, I didn't even measure the castor oil. I just like chugged it, and my husband's like, "Oh my gosh, that was a lot of castor oil." And I'm like, "It doesn't work on me anyways." And I go to sleep, and at 2 o'clock the next morning I wake up and I'm like, "Oh, it definitely works. My stomach hurts. This was a bad idea." And so I go
And
to sit on the toilet.
did you not have like any like reservations as to her, like how did she frame the castor oil thing to you? Was she like, "Oh, it's a natural induction. This will be a way to get your birth started," or like did you not think like, "Oh, this seems like not a great idea," or what was that thought
No,
process?
so it because of the way that because of the way that I had taken it, just a tablespoon at a time and not seen anything happen. And I
Mm,
guess the way that um I don't know why there wasn't any fear, because working in the birth center, I know how often the midwife is like, that woman took castor oil on her own without telling anybody, like what is wrong with her? And so I've heard the stories, but for some reason in that moment it was like I didn't even think about it. I was just like, it didn't work on me those 2 days. I'm just going to try it again, and all I know is I cannot go to that appointment tomorrow. And so I really don't, I couldn't tell you why it wasn't like a concern of mine. But and she also had said that, I guess, no, I'm not even going to put that on her. It was definitely just me just being like, I'm just going to just try it and see what happens.
okay.
So yeah, at 2 in the morning, I did wake up and I was incredibly uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, this was a bad idea. So I go to sit on the toilet, but then I noticed that the feelings that I'm feeling are kind of, I can notice like a rhythm to them. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is it. So I start trying to track it on my contraction timer. And after a little while, I definitely noticed a pattern, and I'm like, oh, okay, so I am in labor. Like this is not, because I wasn't having any like diarrhea or anything like that at all. I was just like, okay, I'm in labor. So my husband eventually woke up and checked on me, and he was like, I told him that I was in labor, and he starts sitting up with me, and we're kind of noting the pattern. And very quickly they started to get very consistent and to come very quickly, but they weren't painful at all. And throughout my whole pregnancy, my goal had been to have a painless birth.
Mm,
And I just set that was my intention. I did a lot of fear work around the pain of birth, because I was going from just assuming that they were just going to knock me out so I wouldn't have to deal with the pain, to now, oh, I'm going to have a natural home birth. So I did a lot of fear work around that, and I decided I'm going to have a painless birth because I've heard that it's possible. And so if it's possible, then it could be possible for me.
mm-hmm.
But my midwife had kind of, I that was another thing that we had a problem about, is my midwife was like, that's not possible. There's no such thing as a painless birth. And I was like,
Whoa.
you don't know that. So
Wow.
when it started to get uncomfortable, I had to really start focusing, because I was like, this is not painful. Don't let your brain tell you that this is painful. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
is uncomfortable. You just need to focus. And so I really was just coaching myself. So I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on until the contraction timer said, go to the hospital. And it was only maybe 2 hours after I had started timing them. And it was like, go to the hospital. And all of a sudden, I couldn't remember anything about what I had learned in my childbirth education class about like what the frequency is supposed to be. There was not a logical thought in my mind of like, the baby is probably coming soon if it
Mm,
says go to the hospital. I was just thinking like, I need to focus, because if I stop focusing for a second, this is going to be painful.
mm,
And so I eventually, like, it gets to the point where I'm like, no, this is definitely painful. I'm panicking. I think I'm panicking. And I start to kind of get a little bit antsy. So I tell my husband to call the midwife, or to send her a picture of the contractions. And of course, it's like 4:30 in the morning. So she doesn't answer the text message. So I have him call her, because I'm like, I'm starting to get worried that I may not be able to do this.
Okay.
And so he calls the midwife, and she answers and basically says, like, I just left a birth, I'm going back to sleep. You've been in labor for 2 hours, you're going to be in labor for the rest of the day, so
Mm.
just, just get your rhythm. And it was the one, I knew she was going to say it, and the moment she said it, I just, like, I clocked out. I was like, great, we're having a baby by ourselves, I don't need you. Like, what do you mean I'm not, like, it's going to be a long time, you haven't even, you don't
Yeah.
know what's going on over here. I was so, like, frustrated, but at the same time I was like, perfect, you made my decision for me, because you clearly,
Yeah.
you don't believe me. I was just very upset in that moment.
Well, yeah, totally. That's a terrible thing to say to someone that's, moving through their birthing process. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's so many things I could say about that, but that's just awful.
And
But
also, it went back for me to the place of, like, people don't believe me, I'm telling them I can do this, I'm telling them it doesn't matter that I'm a first time mom, like, no, why does nobody believe me? And so when she
yeah,
said that, I was like, I don't need you here. If you don't believe me, I can do it
exactly.
myself. And
Hmm.
that was the moment that I decided to free birth. And
Mm.
so she did want to talk to me, and when she's talking to me, I'm thinking, like, she's not going to hear what
Hmm.
she wants to hear. I know as
Yeah.
midwives, they're listening for a certain degree of intensity in your voice. And I'm like, she's not going to hear it, because I'm not in pain like that. I just, like, because especially once I came back to, like, oh, she doesn't believe me, I was like, girl, you're not in pain, these are, like, you are fine. And
Yeah.
so I was like, she's not going to hear the intensity she wants to hear. And that's
Hmm.
just going to make her say something else to me that makes me upset. And, I was like, I see where we're going. So I spoke to her and I told her what was happening. And I told her, like, I feel pressure. I've lost, I've had bloody show. I tell her all the things that I'm like, I just want her to know all the information so that I don't feel like I broke any rules.
Mm.
And she was like, okay, great. Your contractions are gonna spread out once the sun comes up, because we're mammals, and your labor is gonna slow down. And I was like, okay. And so she calls us back in like 3 hours. But during that time, a lot unfolded internally.
Hmm.
And I know now that I went through transition during that period of time,
Okay.
because it got to the point where the contractions were very intense, to the point where, again, I was like, is this painful? Like, no, not really, but it's so intense that I've never felt anything like this before.
Right.
And so I had made a playlist, and it had a lot of worship music on it. And one song started playing that I just, like, noticed out of in the middle of labor. And it was something along the lines of, like, I'll still call it a miracle. Those were the only words that stuck out to me. And
Hmm.
so I just, like, stopped and just grounded myself and breathed and was like, Lord, if you take this pain away right now, I will still call this a miracle. I will still call it a painless birth.
Mm.
Just please take this pain away right now. And the pain immediately stopped.
Mm.
And it was no longer me waffling back and forth between, like, is this painful? I'm not sure. It was a confidence in, this is not painful. It's not stronger than you. You can absolutely do this. And so I was just
Mhm.
filled with peace. And
Mm.
then um I was like, okay, and now I need these contractions to slow down, because I'm beat, I'm worn out, I'm so tired. And the one thing I don't want to happen is for me to get so tired to where I do have to call for help. Like, I know I'm going to need my energy.
Right.
So just help me, please. Let these contractions space out. And as soon, I don't even think I said it out loud, but as soon as I thought it, I
Mhm.
got a long enough break where I was able to take a nap. And
Okay.
I woke back up, like, rejuvenated, and, like, I was able to ride the waves with kind of peace at that point, because I knew when it would end that I would be able to truly rest and, like, go to sleep. And my husband had made me a mound of, like, blankets on the floor. And that's the picture that I sent to you. That was about an hour before I delivered. And so I
Okay.
was just laying on the floor, and I had moved throughout the house, like sitting on the toilet and in the shower, um and different places. And so when the midwife called back, that was where I was when she called back. I was just laying on the floor napping, and she's
Mhm.
like, "So, did your contractions space out?" And I was like, "Yes, they did."
Mm.
And she's like, okay, great. I told you, you're going to be in labor for a long time, X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah. And I was like, okay, just so you know, I feel pressure. Like, I feel I want to push. And
Mhm.
she just, I don't even remember what she said. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she basically was like, call me back when things get more intense or when things pick back up again. And the last thing my husband said to her before he hung up was, should I fill the birth pool up? And she laughed. I remember her laughing, and she was like, no, we're not going to need the birth pool for a long time. And so he hung up, and within maybe 5 to 10 minutes, I was like, go fill the birth pool up. Because at that point, my body was like pushing on its own.
Yeah.
I wasn't pushing with it, but I had no choice but to kind of go with it.
Yeah.
And then I also like put my fingers up my vagina, and I could feel like the sac. And so I was like, I didn't connect the dots of like, if I can feel it, that means the head is pretty low. I just was, I don't know. It's just my instinct said, check and see what's going on. And that was the point where I went and got in the birth tub. And it was really hot. My husband was like trying to pour cold water in there. So I'm like waiting, like going through contractions, kind of dancing around in the water. And then finally I get to sit down in there. And at that point, we just start talking to each other. And he's telling me like, oh, I can see the head. You should go ahead and push that out, because it's just every time every time you start talking, the head goes back in a little while. And I'm like, sir, I got this under control. And so we're literally just talking to each other like we always do. And I'm telling him, okay, we need to come up with a story to, like, after we call the midwife, you need to tell her, oh, it was just so painful that I got in the birth pool and then oops, we had a baby. And my husband's like, can you like focus on what you're doing right now? And so he kind of walks me through. I remember the head is crowning for a while, and not a while, but it was crowning for long enough, because that was the part that was painful. I did not like the ring of fire. That part was definitely, I wasn't in a great position, but at that point I was just so anti ring of fire that I couldn't remember like what to do or how to get away from it. So I was just like, okay, on the next contraction, I'm going to help a little bit, because I don't want this to sit here any longer, but I'm just going to wait for the next contraction. And so I asked my husband if he could see the baby's hands or anything, because I had a fear that the baby was going to be born with the hand up by his face, and that it was I was going to cause me to tear, because I had heard a story like that. And so he was like, yeah, I see a hand. And I was like, and you literally hear me in the video, I'm like, oh, of course there's a hand. And but there was no hand. I don't think anyways. And so on the next contraction, I just kind of let him slip out, and my husband drops his phone in the water and he picks up the baby. And I wasn't sure what he was supposed to look like. So when he was like really limp and everything, the only thing I could think to do was to just put my mouth on his mouth and just suck out whatever was in there. And then he coughed and he cried. And I knew he was okay. And then we called the midwife, and she was freaking out. She was like, what do you mean you had the baby? How did that happen? When? Why? And I'm like, girl, I told you I was feeling pressure.
Exactly. Like, listen to me. I'm saying this is where I'm at in my birth.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just, I hear that all too often with especially first time moms, because the medical midwives just have it in their mind. Oh, she's a first time mom. Her birth is going to take, 24 plus hours. I don't really need to pay attention to her. But, sometimes first time moms have really fast, precipitous births, and their babies just come. So that's the one thing that annoys me about medical midwifery, is that they're so stuck in their box, and they're so like exhausted, because she, like you said, she was just at another birth, so she's prioritizing her rest, which, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. But also you've got a mother on the phone saying, I can feel pressure, this is what's happening, you've got to believe her. But
my frustration is just that we don't know everything about birth. We know hardly anything about birth. And so just to assume that you have the corner on like all of the knowledge, and it's just so there's so much hubris there for me, because I'm like, how could you possibly know every individual and every circumstance to know how it's going to go down? But she did feel really bad. She actually gifted me a visit from a postpartum doula. As kind of like an apology. She never apologized, which is kind of typical. She never apologized, but she gifted me kind of a peace offering of that. And I didn't hold any ill feelings towards her. I knew it unfolded exactly the way that it was supposed to unfold. And at the end of it all, I was able to see why I was guided towards her as a midwife, because I was never going to trust her enough to have her at my birth. And so it unfolded the way that it needed to.
Right. So then I want to ask you a couple questions with this postpartum experiencing now that you said you called her. How long did you wait to call her to come after the birth? Was it before your placenta came out or after your placenta came out? Like, what did that kind of immediate time, postpartum time, look for you?
It was immediately after the baby came out. And then she told me on the phone not to push the placenta out. And I'm like, girl, you are still trying to tell me how to do these things. And it clearly, if the baby is any example, the placenta is going to come out when it wants to come out. But
Mhm.
I won't like try to do it, but I can't try not to. And
Mhm.
so she showed up maybe within 30 minutes, her and her assistant. And she immediately was trying to get me out of the birth pool, and I told her, I feel dizzy. I just remember saying, I feel dizzy. And the next thing you know, there's no baby and I'm just completely disoriented. And my husband tells me that I passed out and that I dropped the baby into the water. And I was like, well, did anybody like catch the baby? And she's like, he's fine. He didn't, nothing's wrong. And it just was another like,
Mm.
I just felt still not listened to. And then when she was kind of checking me to see if there were any cuts or sorry, any tears or lacerations, she told me I had a laceration, like a first degree laceration. And the next day I remember telling her like, this is so painful that it's incredibly painful to pee. And she was like, you're just gonna have to like spread yourself as open as you can and just pee like that. There's nothing that I can do about it. And
Yeah.
I thought I didn't feel the care that I wanted. That was what I really wanted from a midwife. Especially that was why I wanted a traditional midwife, was I wanted that care in the postpartum phase. And she wasn't the type of midwife for that. But everything was fine. Everything was fine with the baby. The only thing was, again, I took her advice as far as taking care of the baby, because I didn't want anything to be wrong with him. And
Mm.
so she said that because he was jaundiced, that we would need to go check the bilirubin levels and all of that kind of stuff. And it turned into a whole like 2-day ordeal of going back and forth to the lab and the hospital. And we ended up contracting COVID at 2 weeks postpartum,
Oh gosh.
just with all of the having to go back and retest and do all of that. And I just
Mhm.
wish I had never done it, because I eventually I found out later that it wasn't as big of a concern as
Yeah.
it was kind of being made to seem. But
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So she doesn't sound like she's a traditional midwife at all.
no, I was saying that was what I want.
Oh,
I
that's what
wanted.
you wanted. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yes, 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 yes. Sorry. No,
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think I mentioned that part of the story, that I had reached out traditional midwife and she hadn't
And she didn't
responded.
get back to you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. That, yeah. Wow. That's big, big work. So then when like your placenta, when it did finally come out, she was there with her assistant. Did
Yeah,
they
she was
like
there.
manage you? Did they give you like punching on your fundus to kind of pull it out, or did they actually allow you to birth it in your own time?
Yeah, she allowed me to birth it in my own time. I was actually still in the birth pool. So it came out very quickly, because
Okay.
it came out like as soon as she got there, because
Mm,
I told her like, "Hey, I feel the placenta coming out." And so she came over with a bowl, and
okay.
we
Yeah.
did delayed cord
That,
clamping and all of that.
okay.
Mhm.
Wow. And what was your breastfeeding journey like? Was that easy? Was it a learning curve, or how did that come for you with your first?
It was definitely a learning curve. For the first 3 months, we literally could only nurse in the football hold position, and so eventually he started getting really long and like gangly, and it was very
Yeah.
hard. So we had to figure out another way. But it
Yeah.
was actually really great. I never had any like concerns about like milk supply or anything like that. It was just the fear of the whole jaundice bilirubin, that he needs to be peeing as much as possible, so you need to be nursing as much as possible. And so I definitely had like the new mom anxiety of, is
Mhm.
he eating enough? Is he getting enough? And then I did get thrush, and I wasn't sure like what that was all about. But at the time, I was still taking him to pediatrician appointments, so they were able to. They prescribed me some medication, but I never took it. I
Mhm.
found some natural remedy, and that took care of it. I think we took like garlic or something like that.
Yeah.
And but other than that, that was our only like little hiccup, was I got the thrush, because we were passing it back and forth to each other. And after that, it was smooth sailing. And we're still nursing. He's 14 months old now, and he still mostly drinks breast milk.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. What a story. So how long was your birth process then? How
So
long
it
was
was 6 hours from the time I woke up to the time that I pushed him out.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
it was fast. It was
that's
very
very
fast.
quick. And yeah, for a first time mother, that is more unusual, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
as though it never happens because it is possible for first time moms to just their babies come
Mm-hmm.
out super duper quick, or sometimes it takes, 4 or 5 days. So it just goes to show how different each human body is, even though the physiologic blueprint of birth is the exact same for every woman.
Mm-hmm.
Dependent upon that woman and her body and her constitution, it could be, just a couple of hours or a couple of
Yeah.
days. So it's so fascinating that you
Yeah.
can't just put birth in a box. You can't just say that it all has to be this way with these certain parameters and these numbers have to be this way before you can do X, Y, or Z, or because every woman is different. There is no such thing as normal when it comes to birth because every woman is her own variation of normal. So,
Exactly. And that was because of what I had heard during my pregnancy about I heard from not only my own midwife, but also online, people that I respected, midwives that I respected in the community, saying that a painless birth is impossible, and to speak about it as if it is a possibility is doing women a disservice. And so I carried that over into my postpartum period because I had successfully manifested something that I had set out to achieve.
yeah.
And when nobody congratulated me, I found myself, it was almost like I didn't even achieve it. It was like maybe I imagined it because nobody is responding the way that I thought that they would respond.
Yeah.
And so that kind of as I went through this like postpartum depression journey, it was actually so that I could face this evolution that I needed to face, of realizing I was outsourcing, trying to get this external validation that
Mhm.
you're never going to get.
Yeah.
You will only be as pleased with your successes as you can create within yourself. You'll never get that from somebody else.
Mhm.
And that kind of for me has been the lesson about motherhood as well, is like you can whatever is your truth is true for you, and it
Mhm.
doesn't diminish anybody else's truth or experience. And it's important to share everybody's experience, because whether it is miraculous or whether it is traumatic, it's necessary to give to the collective as medicine, because it is medicine for somebody. And
Absolutely.
so I would be doing a disservice by not speaking out about my experience, because it's valid regardless of what somebody else's truth is. And so I had to go through that whole process. It happened, like I said, exactly the way it needed to, because I thought I was setting this goal for myself, and I had to come to the realization of we have to get to the root of all of our desires, because there can be some insidious shame and hunger for approval kind of
Mhm.
tied into all of our deepest desires.
Mhm. And that's the thing as well, like hearing women speak of having pain-free births or pleasurable births in most mainstream birthing communities is um like looked down upon, because if a woman's going to come into a birth circle and say, oh my goodness, my birth was euphoric and I felt no pain and I did this free of the medical system, all of the other mothers that were there and say they had traumatic births, their babies were cut from their bodies, they had episiotomies when they said no, it triggers something within them that it turns it into almost as if this mother that's sharing a positive birth experience is trying to shame the mothers that had their trauma, when it's actually the opposite. This mother is trying to say, like, your birth could be different if you make these different choices, you could have this experience too. But because of the narrative surrounding birth and the culture surrounding birth, it is looked upon that like a woman that has a birth in her freedom and pleasurable, pain-free, whatever it may be, it's looked upon as like that's the bad choice. Whereas the birth in hospital, like you have to have the trauma, you have to have all of the unnecessary interventions, you have to hold the badge of honor to say that my birth was a quote unquote emergency cesarean, then it's more accepted, which is so crazy that that is the acceptance of birth. It's like, oh, you can't talk about your birth unless you can say that you had some form of trauma and violence happening to you, or else if you're going to share your story, then you're, whatever, trying to make all the other women feel bad for. Yeah, it's just so crazy. So I'm super grateful that you are able to share so freely that you had this pain-free birth, and you, like you said, you manifested what you wanted in your birth experience, and you made it happen, because it's something that women need to hear. Yes, you can birth outside of the system, and yes, it could be difficult, it could be intense, there could be pain, or it could be pleasurable. That is an absolute possibility. And to even have your medical midwife say, like, no, that's not even possible, that's just crazy. Like, how does she know? Obviously she's never seen that because of the way that she manages birth. So you're not going to have a pain-free, pleasurable birth experience when you're birthing in a medical setting. But yeah, it's absolutely possible. So I'm grateful that you can share that and say, like, yeah, I did that for myself and I had that. So
Thank you. Yeah. And even that too, like setting the goal for birth to be painless, even I've even able to come full circle on that's not truly the goal. The goal is to know how to face pain when it is presented to you, so that you can, that the pain is not stronger than you. Like, that the goal is to be able to surrender to it so that it is not painful anymore. You actually have to move through the pain. It wasn't that my birth was without pain. It was that I was able to move through the pain to the other side of it. And so even that, I'm just grateful for all of the time of reflection that I had to be able to come up with what is my truth from this experience, and then to be bold enough to say, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to trigger anybody. I used to be that person who was triggered. And so I don't want to be that, but I have to stand in my truth for somebody else.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful story.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you wanted to speak upon with your pregnancy, birth, postpartum, or even preconception journey?
I will say that I see a lot of suffering in motherhood, and that now is what I'm on a mission. As a birth worker, I thought, okay, well, let me hold women through the transition from maiden to mother. But a lot happens in maidenhood that prepares you for motherhood. You have to learn, as in your maidenhood, the power of your no and the magic of your yes. Like, you have to learn both, and how to surrender. And so I just encourage everyone to take a look at their lives, because the way that we live is the way that we birth, is the way that we mother. And so if you want to have the mothering experience that you want, I believe that it is possible for you. There's so much suffering and so much outside of us that says that it's not possible, that you can't have the experience that you want, but it is possible if you can live the way that you want. And so many of us are not living the way that we want. And so if you live in your power and you make conscious choices about your life, then you will birth in your power, whether it's painless or not. It will be in your power, and then you will be able to mother in your power. And so it starts way before birth. And I just encourage women to be aware of that every choice you make is so important and powerful, and you are powerful.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That's a beautiful way to end it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just putting this in here real quick because I was so enthralled with Kyrah's last words as she was speaking in her interview. I forgot to ask her if there was a place for women to reach out to her if they wanted to speak to her on the birth work that she's doing, work with her, or just hear more of her beautiful birth story and how she stood in her power and trusted herself, and also manifested that beautiful, pleasurable birth experience. So you can find Kyrah on Instagram at mythic_motherhood. Thank you, sisters, so much for listening to this episode of the Free Birthing Color podcast. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one in a primal activation session, donate to the podcast, or to have your story featured here or in the blog, go to primalwomanportal.com for all the information to do so. Did you want to connect with our guest speaker? You can find all her information linked within the show notes. And if you have time, please subscribe, write a review, and tell a friend to have a listen so that this podcast and these stories of women birthing in their total power can be shared far and wide. Don't forget to check out the show notes for information on the Earth Daughters Women's Festival, the Breach Without Borders workshop, and much more. New episodes drop every Thursday morning, so stay tuned for the next amazing story to be shared on any platform that you prefer to listen to your podcasts on, or watch these episodes on the Free Birthing in Color YouTube page. And remember, your voice and your story matters. So if you're a woman of color or an Indigenous woman who's had a wild pregnancy and or birth outside of the medical system, submit your story, because it's so important that your voice is heard and celebrated in your radical journey of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood.